Welcome back to another episode of What Happened, the show that's everyone's
worst nightmare.
And really, in the realm of movie games, there are few nightmares as vivid as 2014's Rambo the video game. Just as licensed titles were going out of style on consoles, John Rambo burst onto the Xbox 360, PS3, and PC with guns a-blazing and quickly demonstrated just why licensed games were losing ground. With game development more complicated and expensive than ever before, the short turnaround time and restrictions of adapting a known property would inevitably cause some clashes. This was certainly the case with today's subject, and the inexperienced studios who were tasked with a mission that they were never actually expected to complete. So tighten your headband and grab your exploding arrows, it's time to find out what happened to Rambo the video game.
They drew first blood, not me.
First Blood Part 3, Rambo 4, John Rambo, Rambo 2008, was a surprise success when it splattered into theaters and saw Sylvester Stallone's career experience a small resurgence with its high box office body count. To coincide with this, Studio Canal, the owner of the first three Rambo films, had licensed the arcade video game rights to Sega, who tapped Takeshi Oda, the director of the House of the Dead series, to helm an intense 3D rail shooter that took you through the pivotal moments of First Blood Part 2 and Rambo 3. A few years later, the home console rights would be licensed to UK-based Reef Entertainment with a formal announcement in 2011. Reef was a mid-tier publisher in the European market and had their logo slapped on the most random assortment of titles you can think of. I'm talking about stuff like the Wii version of Rogue Trooper, Real Heroes Firefighter, and most importantly, Captain Morgaine and the Golden Turtle.
Carlo and me ain't never sailed with a woman before.
As you can see, nabbing the Rambo IP was perceived as a big get for them. The late Peter Rezin, CEO of Reef Entertainment at the time, had this to say. I am a big fan of Sylvester Stallone movies, and when we had the opportunity to secure the video game rights from Studio Canal for the Rambo franchise, we had to grab it with both hands. With the success of the most recent Rambo film and international appetite for action movies with Expendables 2 scheduled for release next summer, we felt now was a good time to do something special with this license. This enthusiasm was shared by Reef commercial director Craig Lewis, who is a little bit more candid as to why this deal came about. We have big ambitions for Reef, and the Rambo IP is the first step in establishing us as a worldwide player. In the press release, they stated that the target release date was later in 2012, which made it seem like things were well underway and going smoothly. But of course, you're watching what happened. Tejon, a small Polish studio, was chosen as the developer, and much like Reef, were a underdog studio. They put out a lot, and I mean a lot of titles, but the one that's really important to us today is Heavy Fire Special Operations, originally released for the Wii in 2010. This was then followed up by the incredibly similar game Heavy Fire Black Arms, which was followed up by the even more similar Heavy Fire Afghanistan, all within a tight 16-month period. Unless you're headless, you can probably tell that these are all interchangeable shooting galleries, made very fast and priced appropriately. Now, when Reef announced that they had acquired the Rambo license, they played it a bit close to the chest about what it was even going to be. In a late 2011 interview with Movie Mavericks, Craig Lewis was asked, "At this point, is there any idea what type of game you will be making, i.e. first-person shooter, third-person shooter, etc.? He would answer, "We will have a full press release on this very point. All I can say at the moment is, of course, it will be a shooter with lots of guns, explosions, and everything that is Rambo. More specific information on the game will be released on the build-up to Christmas." Coming off of a hot streak of unsuccessful heavy arms games, it's no surprise that Rambo would end up piggybacking on the rail shooter expertise. I was able to confirm privately with a source close to the project that despite the coy answer to the aforementioned question, the game was always planned to be on rails, which you shot on. But despite their experience in this genre, and despite being worked on for close to 3 years, Rambo would end up shipping with a feature-bare 3-hour campaign. The same source I spoke to shared that the game's extended development time was due to a confluence of problems, including management/marketing issues and an overly ambitious scope. After a brief 2012 trailer that recycled clips from the older films, a gameplay reveal was finally shown in 2013, which many complained was somewhat disingenuous. While there are plenty of clips that show raw gameplay, it was mostly all in-game cutscenes, the third-person QTE segments, and zoomed-in footage of the action. These were cut very quickly and deliberately, and I would argue it was done in such a way to hide the on-rails nature of the gameplay. Around the same time, Reef confirmed that both Sylvester Stallone and Colonel Trautman, Richard Crenna, would be providing voiceovers for the game, which was kind of curious, as Crenna passed away back in 2003. A Reef spokesperson later clarified, "Our goal is to produce the finest Rambo video game ever made. To do that, we are including dialogue, special effects, and music from the movies. Studio Canal, the owners of the Rambo films, searched their extensive archives and tracked down audio reels containing the original voice recording tapes for First Blood Part 2, and Rambo 3. These tapes provided us with the pristine vocal performances of Stallone and Crenna that we have included in the game." Your Honor, I object to the usage of the word pristine.
A few miles up the road, there's a truck stop there. You can eat something.
Is there a law against me doing something here?
Me, I'm stopping.
I'm not sure whether the audio tapes were poorly preserved or whether Taeyon were not allowed to tamper with them, but the quality was certainly not optimal. So while they could use the recordings of the two principal actors, that wasn't 100% true when it came to the rest of the cast of the films. New audio recordings for random NPCs frequently play alongside the low-fidelity original ones, making for a jarring and inconsistent auditory experience.
Get your paws over your head and turn around, son.
This boy's wriggling like a damn earthworm.
Once the gameplay trailer finally hit, Rambo's release date was narrowed down to winter 2013. But then, in October, Reef would send word that the game's deployment would instead shift to early 2014, placing it directly into the post-launch death zone of the Xbox One and PS4. Now, as far as I can find, Reef never made an actual statement as to why the game was getting delayed. Not even the stock, "we want to deliver the most polished Rambo experience we can at launch" type thing. So why the sudden change? Well, having some experience in QA, a last-minute delay of just 2 to 3 months in that era usually meant a pre-certification issue, like something to do with how the game saves and handles data, or other technical requirements. Fixing such an issue can be complicated, and once a fix is found and implemented, a new build of the whole game needs to be tested and then resubmitted.
Well, a big muscle-bound nerd!
Now, since Reef is a UK outfit, Rambo infiltrated Europe on February 21st and only hit North America 2 months later on April 29th. This staggered release plan was, in hindsight, probably not the best idea, as it caused a surge of rough-looking gameplay to flood onto YouTube, as well as European gaming outlets getting their overwhelmingly negative reviews out well ahead of the North American launch. It also didn't help that there were already grumblings from fans about the game being an on-rails shooter, but when you add poor cover systems, twitchy and inaccurate controls, countless bugs, brutal difficulty, and a very short campaign to the mix, then Rambo's chances of success drastically go down.
But I'm a genetic freak, and I'm not normal.
By the time the game was out on shelves the world over, it already built up quite the bad reputation. When reviewers and consumers alike agree on a worst game of the year contender as early as April, you know you're gonna be in for a rough one. Reef's big gamble wasn't panning out, which was all the more crushing when you look back at earlier interviews where they discussed plans to make even more Rambo games if this one was a hit. They certainly were aiming higher though, as a free campaign add-on was already in development. This was the Baker Team DLC, which added new story content and also folded in general improvements since they were sorely needed. Months passed, and then years, and eventually Reef stopped talking about the DLC altogether. Then, 2 years later, in 2016, the Baker Team DLC suddenly released on Steam and PS3. In a Kotaku article, Reef Entertainment spokesperson Jaspreet Marwaha detailed why the DLC was so late to the extremely lonely Rambo party. Reef were aware that the game wasn't received very well, and while they and Teon were committed to fixing some of those launch issues, lots of technical headaches prevented the DLC from being integrated in a timely manner. Well, as you can imagine, we never planned to release the DLC 2 years after the release of the main game. Hence the decision for a free update/DLC to the game incorporating a new and original mini-campaign focusing on a prequel to the Rambo story. Given that this was our first time releasing a game update together with the dev team, this was a very time-consuming process with a high learning curve, especially since we had to do this while also working on our other project. So it became a very stop-start process. Rambo had apparently not been built with DLC in mind, so they had to create new functionality for that in addition to the DLC, which would require not only getting the DLC through platform holder regulations, but also new builds of the base game itself for each of the available regions. They were still trying to work through problems on the 360 version, and with no clear timeline as to when that would be finished, we decided we could not wait any longer to release the other two versions. There was nothing for us to lose by releasing the DLC. We didn't see any reason to hold back. Ultimately, the 360 Baker Team DLC would never be released. Earlier in that same interview, Jaspreet would earnestly admit we were a little naive. The team had clearly been a bit in over their heads. They were used to smaller, digital-only games, and this was a whole new layer of added complexity. So the Baker Team DLC released for the cool price of $0, and they really didn't need to do this. The game sold poorly, was reviewed worse, but yet they still wanted to offer up a freebie for all the morbidly curious fans out there. Did it make the game that much better? Not really, but it's the thought that counts. Jaspreet also mentioned another upcoming project, and honestly, it's one of the more fascinating things about this story. All the way back in 2013, Reef announced they and Teon had also secured the Terminator license, and were planning to make a game that take advantage of the upcoming 2015 disaster, Terminator Genisys. Originally, this project was called Terminators, the game, but after its own incredibly long development, would release as Terminator Resistance in 2019, one of the most underrated FPSs of the last few years. Seriously, I've made multiple videos of playing this game. It's really fun and made with reverence for the source material, but since my FPS opinion means nothing, it also comes Civi 11 approved.
They could have made a better Terminator game, but all things considered, this is a solid C+, like a 7, 7.5.
Not only have Teon supported Resistance with a bunch of cool post-launch content and a free next-gen upgrade path, they also recently announced an FPS based on RoboCop, subtitled Rogue City. And if it winds up being even half as good as Resistance,
I'd buy that for $1.
As for good old Johnny R, well, while he hasn't gotten another standalone game since 2014, and most likely never will, he's still been very busy with various appearances throughout the Digiverse. He was the final guest fighter in MK11 Aftermath, did a tour in Call of Duty, and was endlessly referenced, but did not actually appear in a recent bizarre bit of content for Far Cry 6. So, at the very least, the legendary war vet's career did not end on a sour note. Unless you count Last Blood, in which case it did. It's clear both Reef and Teon learned a lot working on Rambo, which at the time was the biggest, most complicated game either company had ever worked on, and despite an extremely public clashing over an extremely bad game, both came out the other end better for it. It just goes to show that sometimes, even when things are looking grim, you can't just give in and assume it's all over, because
Nothing is over! Nothing!
if you know of any other sloppy shooters, rail or otherwise, let me know in the comments below, over on my Twitter, or sneak into the jungles of the Flophouse VIP Patreon, become a big boss and nominate what I take on in the future. See you next time, and thanks for watching!